What's up, guys? Beyond the Forbidden. I had the honor and privilege to be able to interview Dr. Joseph Farrell once again in person. This video is just one genre discussion of several genres that we try to unravel. Dr. Farrell brilliantly explains the dangers with artificial intelligence and lays out the possible blueprint of how the elitists of this world are trying to one day infuse human consciousness into the machines. He explains these dangers must be addressed with a keen eye if we do not one day wish to end up in a Terminator-like AI futuristic society. A few other talking points within this interview are, will AI one day turn on us? Elon Musk's involvement with artificial intelligence? The Cold War race to perfecting artificial intelligence? Will AI be used in malevolent agendas? What role does CERN, the Large Hadron Collider, have in artificial intelligence? Do we live in a simulated universe? That's just a few of the jaw-dropping topics within this video. This is definitely one mind-blowing interview that you must watch. Please enjoy and drop some comments below. All right, Joseph, I appreciate your time.
Certainly.
I was here last year and we talked about many great, fascinating topics. So what I want to start off with this segment, I'm going to have several segments that we want to make videos, different genres of topics. But this one, which we didn't really cover last year at all, was artificial intelligence. Because It seems like artificial intelligence is AI. It's getting a lot of buzz in the media, the government, with just people in general, with tech companies. Now, why is artificial intelligence getting so much attention as of late with tech companies, academia, as you say, Elon Musk, and even the dangers? Why is it getting so much attention now?
Well, I think it's partly because they're trying to prepare people for vast changes in the way that our operating systems work and what they're capable of. But I think the part of the preparation that they're afraid of, or that they know is going to be problematic, and this is why they're talking about it so much, is that artificial intelligence ultimately, I think, is kind of an anti-human thing. And the reason I say that is we've been living with artificial intelligence in a major way to a certain extent already. If you look at the markets, the stock markets, the bond markets, the commodities markets, a lot of these markets now have the vast majority of their trading being executed by computers, computer algorithms, dark pools, these vast computer networks and hardware that they have placed close to where the market actually trades, so that they can use that extra few nanoseconds to execute trades. So we've been living with essentially artificial markets since the late 1980s. And this, I've discussed this problem with Catherine Fitz for many years, that what this in effect has done is our markets are no longer reflective of genuine human trading activity. We've got these flash crashes that occur every now and then when the computers go haywire or someone hacks into them. This is the other thing that I think we have to be concerned about, because no cyber system is secure. There's just absolutely no such thing. So we've been living really in kind of an artificial computer-driven world as far as our markets are concerned, and they're not really reflecting any genuine human trading activity. And I find that very, very disturbing. It's completely artificial and disconnected. I'd rather go back to the old days when you have people on the floor at the New York Stock Exchange, shouting and screaming at each other and waving papers around, because that at least is reflective of a human trading activity. So that's number one. Number two, I think that Elon Musk really put his finger on something that I've always kind of considered a risk with artificial intelligence. We don't know enough about consciousness itself to know when a neural net including a computer network, might wake up or transduce something into the system. Hollywood has done a number of movies on that subject over the years, all the way back to Lawnmower Man, all of those films that came out with artificial intelligence waking up and, starting to take over. I think that's a significant danger. And the third problem, and this to me is the biggest problem with artificial intelligence, is that it bifurcates society into the technocrats running the system who therefore have access not only to massive amounts of data, but an ability to process that data and drive things in a way, again, using the markets as an example, that could be ultimately inhuman or anti-human. You're putting technocrats in charge of things. And what that does, let's use CERN for an example, because I've speculated on CERN and the massive amount of computing power that they have available to them. They have computers that literally have to sift through billions of particle reactions in, mere seconds, and then pull data based on the computer algorithms that they've programmed into these computers, pull data out and then pass it along to the scientists who interpret the data that the computer wants them to look at. Well, who's to say that there isn't a hidden filter in that's pulling data that is not made publicly available, but only privately available to certain select committees that are going to look at data that they don't want anybody else to know about? This is a problem because obviously science itself is based on repetition and the ability to perform experiments. Well, if you're hiding data from people, what does that say about science? If you're going to take that model and expand it to the entire AI world, then you're empowering hidden technocrats to create filters to sift data. We've seen this already with Google and YouTube censoring things. So if you're going to have an AI-driven system that can do this much faster, process data much faster, you're creating another danger. And that's the fourth topic here that I think AI poses. And that's the ability to program so much data that it gives the technocrats the ability to make strategic planning that most of us cannot make, most of us would not have access to. And that's a tremendous amount of power in the hands of governments, in the hands of corporations, and so on and so forth. They're already mining our data. We've lost our privacy rights. They can take our data and buy it and sell it. And this coupled with AI and the idea that you might have the ability to create hidden filters that empowers only a certain limited select number of people to use that data and plan things, you're looking at a breakdown in the ability of human society to cope with it. So you're bifurcating. You're literally creating kind of I think, an AI-driven feudalism. Think of the Middle Ages on computers. That's what you're creating.
It's kind of scary.
It's very scary. It's very scary. It's a difficult topic, but the problem, the biggest problem for me is I think that Elon Musk, when he came out with that idea that you might be transducing something into the system that's kind of out there, and the reason that I think that has some traction is that there was a neurophysiological study, I think a couple years ago, I forget where it was done, where they concluded that the human brain requires mathematics in 11 dimensions to model. Now stop and think about what they just said. The human brain requires mathematics in 11 spatial dimensions, more than our 3. Just to be able to model the brain. Well, what that tells me is that the brain is not locked up here in the skull. The brain is a transducer to the mind, and the mind is out there in a hyperdimensional space. And it's that complex neural net that actually transduces it. Now translate that to computers. If you create a network complex enough in terms of its mathematical modeling, you might be transducing Just like Musk said, you might be opening a gateway or something to transduce a consciousness into that system, and that may not be a very benign one either. So I think there's a lot of dangers to it, quite frankly.
And Elon Musk talks about some of these dangers.
Yes,
too.
yes, he does.
He, for one, here's a quote: there certainly will be job disruption, because what's going to happen is robots will be able to do everything better than us. I mean, all of us," said Musk at the National Governors Association. And he also stated, "Yeah, I am not sure exactly what to do about this. This is really the scariest problem to me, I will tell you." And he also stated, "Transport will be one of the first to go fully autonomous. But when I say everything, the robots will be able to do everything bar nothing." Or I'm not sure exactly, but
right.
Tell me what do you think about?
Well, I think it's
about this.
Well,
about
stop and think of just what has been happening with these automated cars and trucks. I mean, we've got trucks right now on the highway with no drivers. I can take you a mile north of here to a railroad crossing, and there's a little sign at the railroad crossing that gives a notice that many of the trains passing through there don't even have an engineer. There's not a human in the cab. It's just a train running on its own from somewhere to somewhere.
That's also scary.
Yeah, that's also, yeah, train. Yeah, a train. Let's hope the rail master or the yard master down there has all of the little computer programs lined up, so the thing doesn't hit the wrong track. But this is the problem. And we've already seen problems with these automated systems in vehicles. Now, just imagine a place like New York City. I can think of the Major Deegan Expressway and the George Washington Bridge at rush hour, all being run by automated vehicles. Now, you want a traffic jam. What if the system goes down? What happens then? Quite frankly.
Or what if it gets taken over by some hacker?
Well, precisely. I mean, look at the U.S. Navy. I just did a blog about this. Look at the U.S. Navy with the Donald Cook incident back in the Black Sea, and then the subsequent incident with the same ship in the Baltic Sea, when an obsolescent Russian Sukhoi 22 fighter approached the ship. Apparently, all of the electrical systems went down. The ship had to beat a hasty retreat to some port in Romania. I think it was Constanza. And, these systems are not secure. That's my point. And now the Navy has come out after the Fitzgerald collision off the waters of Japan, and then the John McCain collision off the waters of Singapore. The Navy just recently announced that, hey, we're going back to analog systems. In other words, we're going to have a big wheel on the bridge, and you're going to turn it this way to go to port, and you're going to turn it that way to go to starboard, and, manual throttles and so on. Because, and this to me was a real admission about the necessity for human control of these essential systems, because it turns out that the computer digital system for turning and steering the ship and controlling the throttles was too complex for people to operate under stress. So they're going back to analog. There is a danger with any AI system, like you say. It can be hacked, and hacked by whom? Let's assume you have more than one AI out there, and they're all hacking each other. Where does that leave us? Well, we're caught in cyber no man's land, between the Allied and German lines, as these AIs are battling it out with each other. So this is not a position I want to be in. I think since you're on the subject of AI, I think we're looking at, in some cases, a return to analog for precisely this reason and other reasons. I'm a big steam. Anybody that knows me knows I love steam locomotives. Well, it's very intriguing to me. Union Pacific Railroad, and I've talked about this on my website and blogs. Union Pacific Railroad has restored 3 old steam locomotives to operating condition. And you can go on YouTube and look at these videos, and you've got these, you can see these videos of these steam locomotives touring around the country, pulling freight or pulling passenger trains or whatever. And I have to ask myself, why is Union Pacific Railroad investing all the money? I mean, they've created a steam shop in Cheyenne, Wyoming, which is essentially a locomotive works. So they can probably build a steam locomotive from scratch now because they've had to restore these steam locomotives. So I have to ask myself, well, why are they investing all this money in steam locomotives? And I mean, these things are big. they're not just tiny little things.
Makes you wonder, though.
Well, it's not Union Pacific. Burlington Northern has done this. They're restoring steam locomotives in Great Britain, in France, in Italy, in Germany, Australia. And I got to thinking, well, why the push for steam locomotives? Is it just so that we can all enjoy railroad heritage days? And I think not. I think what you're dealing with is these things will continue to run if there's electromagnetic pulse. Everything in that cab is analog, dials, gauges,
So
wheels.
They're expecting something like that in the future?
That's my guess. This is, these railroads are not spending the money and training the crews to operate these things just for kicks and giggles, or like I say, to have a steam locomotive chug into town so that you can all take pictures of a steam locomotive and enjoy railroad heritage days. They're doing it for a reason. And I think, with the Navy going back to analog controls and ships, and I fully expect that means they're also going to start teaching sailors how to navigate using celestial navigation and so on and so forth, that it's an absolutely essential thing for national security. I think they're getting ready for something. So what happens if we create these AI systems, we get the electromagnetic pulse, and everything goes down? How do you run a railroad? Well, your diesel electric locomotives ain't going to work.
No, not at all.
They're not going to work. Your automated semaphore systems on the rail lines isn't going to work. So I think there's some sort of weird move afoot, if you look at this phenomenon on a global basis, that they're trying to build some analog redundancy into systems so that they don't go down.
And with these questions that I have regarding AI, the dangers of artificial intelligence, etc., we may be jumping from here to there, but people will still get the picture. Because we're covering so much ground, it's hard to know exactly where to go in chronological order with this, because AI is unpredictable. You don't know how to really go about with, especially with these questions. But I guess why has the advancement in AI seemed to have increased tenfold over the past couple of years? We kind of went over that, but it's almost like they are tapped in to some other force out there, maybe like something similar to the Nazi real and full society that is being used in fashion to help put these technological advances. So as we know, and also through your research, which has shown that the Nazis, they had these type of ideologies, but do these Nazi ideologies still live within our government to push this AI agenda, possibly ever since maybe Project Paperclip?
Oh yeah,
and maybe
if let's put it this way: if you look at Nazi Germany, and if you look at that ideology in terms of its effect on their black projects research programs during the war and after, I would add, if you look at it, what you're really looking at is an entire country that really adopted this technocratic creed that technology and science is the answer to all of our problems, and all we have to do is perfect all of this bizarre, wild, out-of-the-box technology. It's the first country that really dedicated itself to that. And then you look at the Soviet Union. If you look at the Soviet Union, particularly in certain stages under Joseph Stalin, you're looking at the same thing. You're looking at a state that gave itself over to an ideology of there is no God and it's all up to us and it's all materialism and it's all science and it's all technology. Well, I think there's a lesson in that both states collapsed, because ultimately what they did was they created something not only inhuman but anti-human. And no one can function in a society like that. And you raise a good point. When we make the deal with the Nazi devil at the end of World War II to bring all of these scientists and so on over here and inject them into some of the most sensitive areas of government research, what we were doing, whether we realized it or not, what we were doing was we were injecting that ideology into some major agencies of this government. And if the government looks inhuman or anti-human, I would say that's a large part of the reason why, because you've created a technocratic state where people believe in all sincerity that science can do whatever the hell it pleases, and this is going to solve all of our problems. We can grow human organs in pigs and monkeys and kill it and then transplant the organs and upload our consciousness into computers and put computer chips in our heads and, all of this nonsense. And it's going to lead us to a paradise. Well, it may be a paradise, but it's going to be, it's going to be the same kind of paradise that Milton wrote about in Paradise Lost. Better to rule in hell than serve in heaven. That's, that kind of paradise.
And I don't even know what I'm going to label have the title of this interview with AI.
Mm-hmm.
I've been thinking about something, and this is going to be kind of within this question we'll ask you. Maybe the AI causality effect. I don't know, because think about it. Everything we do now will have an effect
Sure.
in the future.
Yes.
And that's the scary thing, Joseph, because what do we know exactly? We don't know how this is going to turn out.
No, we don't.
Because we are actually trying to make, I guess, an artificial intelligence being that has human consciousness, and they are trying to go towards that singularity effect.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the scary thing, Joseph.
It's extremely scary.
We don't know this causality effect, how it's going to play out in the future.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. Are you familiar with Isaac Asimov, the famous science fiction writer?
Through you, I am.
Okay. Are you familiar with the fact that he did a series, a trilogy, that was subsequently expanded to become several books, called the Foundation Trilogy? And it's one of his classic works, along with I, Robot. In other words, he was concerned about the possibilities of AI. And one of the things, Shiloh, no. Commentary by the Canine Peanut Gallery. But one of the things that he mentions in the Foundation Trilogy is that the ability of science to mathematically model and statistically model aggregate human behavior at some point grew so great that everything became automated and began to be run just kind of by rote, okay? And he predicted two things in this trilogy would happen because of that. The first was that as human beings became more reliant on technology, they became less able to service it. So things began to break down. And again, we're back to the U.S. Navy with the Fitzgerald and John McCain incidents, where now the Navy's maintaining that it was their very reliance on these digital technologies when an analog technology would have worked perfectly well. Turn the wheel to get the ship out of the way of the other ship instead of hitting all these buttons, frantically, trying, Ensign, are we turning yet? I'm working on it, sir. But, in the old days, it would be, turn 30 degrees to port, turn the wheel, and that's it. And you get the immediate response. So you've got that problem. And this is something he predicts as a result of the over-reliance on technology and the reliance on artificial intelligence to do all of our thinking and service work. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And he has a case, makes a case, although he made the case 20 years ahead of the incident I'm about to describe. In my book, The Third Way, I recount the fact that in the late 1980s, the French intelligence agency, the DST in France, had a mole inside the KGB's technical acquisitions branch. In other words, this was the branch of the KGB that would go out and steal technology from other countries. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Well, France had a mole that was so highly placed in that branch of the KGB that President Mitterrand informed President Reagan about this personally, face to face, when they were at a summit together. And Reagan, in turn, turns this over to the National Security Council. And one of the things on the shopping list of the KGB that this mole told the French that the KGB wanted was sophisticated Western software, the latest in artificial intelligence software at that time. So the Reagan administration arranged for the Soviet Union to steal it. Okay? And they put back doors, and here's the key. They put back doors into this software. And so the Soviet Union gets a hold of this software. They don't have anybody that can go through the code and really kind of see that it's okay. So they just steal the software and they put it into their systems. And about 3 months later, what happens? Well, there's a huge explosion in a Soviet gas pipeline that's visible from outer space because of this rotten software. And the Soviets, again, were so reliant themselves on this technology that they were not able to look at the software, service the software, and find out that they had a problem. So we're back to Asimov. As we increasingly become reliant on this stuff, we're increasingly incapable of maintaining a system. So I think this move back to analog is in fact because somebody in the national security establishment or in the Union Pacific Railroad has woken up to the fact, hey, we better be able to know how to do this stuff, to make the driving rods on the steam engine and, you know, to turn this valve and get the steam up and be able to carry freight across the country in case the whole system goes down. I think that's a key here. The other thing that Asimov points out in the Foundation trilogy, and this to me is classic. At a certain point in the trilogy, he has a figure arise called the Mule, who plays havoc with the system because he's an individual. He has not been predicted by the statistical aggregate of the computer programs. So you're dealing now with an empire, a galactic empire that's all being run on computer algorithms, and they don't know how to respond to this guy because he's out there thinking for himself and, you know, throwing a huge monkey wrench into the system. Well, that's again what I think the danger to AI could be, is you're always going to have outliers. There's always going to be an inability of any mathematical model to predict every single last individual human decision and choice. That's just the bottom line. So again, you know, there's a certain necessity for maintaining analog systems. And, you know, if your readers, if your listeners, your viewers want a good kind of science fiction philosophical study of all these issues, I would recommend very definitely Isaac Asimov, because he was dealing with these issues 60, 70 years ago when he wrote these books.
And you were talking about Russia a while ago, and then we've already talked about Elon Musk. Not too long ago, he tweeted on his Twitter page. No, this is a Putin quote on AI. This is a Putin quote on AI. But Elon Musk retweeted that Putin quote on his page. Putin says, the nation that leads in AI will be, quote, will be the ruler of the world. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's true, but you know, it's true in the sense that if you get there first and far ahead enough of everybody else, yes. But the problem is you've got Japan working on it. You've got China working on it. You've got Russia working on it. You've got us working on it, and probably the British and the French and the Germans and all the usual suspects working, usual suspects working on it. So what happens if everybody gets there at right around the same time? So we're back to my scenario where you've got several AIs battling it out, and we're in cyber no man's land caught between the trenches.
See.
And there's even I don't know if you've seen the television series Person of Interest, which is all about an AI machine.
Watched all 4. I think it's 4 seasons.
Okay, well, what do you have in the 4th season? You've got one AI battling another AI, and one AI is taking the stock market down and then bringing it all back up and messing with stoplights and everything, and another AI trying to stop it, and a bunch of people caught in the middle. So I don't think it's necessarily true, therefore, that whoever gets there first is going to dominate the world, because I don't think that there's enough lead time between any of these countries for one of them to come up with it and be able to do that. I just don't. I think in fact,
it needs to be. I didn't mean to interrupt. It needs to be rephrased that whoever is the smartest with the possible ramifications of AI may be the world.
Well, maybe, but even there, I happen to think already that we're in a kind of hot cyber war with some of these countries. I mean, it's clear in China's case that we are. So I think that the final danger of AI is precisely this: that you're creating a condition where you could have cyber warfare going on all the time. Forget about Google and YouTube censoring people. If the Chinese or the Russians get in on this act and start playing around with search engines and so on and so forth. And the reason I think that that's a real possibility is if you look at the hacking stories over the last 5 to 6 years, you've got the Sony hack, you had JP Morgan Chase hacked, a bunch of banks hacked. And, Barclays or some big bank in England, a couple of years ago was hacked. And if you look at this, and you also look at the stories now around the world of the power grid going out, Venezuela, Indonesia, Great Britain, just in the last few months have had these major power outages. I think we're looking at cyber warfare. I really do. And if that's the case, turn that over to AI if you want some real kicks and giggles. What we've seen thus far is nothing. And if that starts to happen, what are you going to need? You're going to need people familiar with analog systems. They're going to be able to turn the dial on the pipeline and read the gauge and tell me that we have an educated class in this country able to do that right now. No.
No, not at all.
That's the problem.
And so I want to go back to CERN.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible, and you touched on it a little bit, is it possible that CERN is working secretly on not just exploding atoms amongst each other, but actually trying to figure out a way for these multi-billion-dollar tech companies to be able to infuse consciousness into a machine?
Well, I don't know if CERN is working on that, but I'll tell you, there's a lot that CERN is doing that makes me very suspicious. When they first started up, they were giving us the line that, okay, we're just looking for, confirmations of the standard model of quantum mechanics. We're looking for this particle and that particle and so on and so forth. And I thought, no, because let's go back to a fellow I've mentioned in some of my books, Secrets of the Unified Field and the McCarthy book, believe it or not, a fellow by the name of Gabriel Krohn. He was a Hungarian Jewish electrical engineer in between the wars. He came to this country. He ended up as the head of research at General Electric in Schenectady. in New York. And this man was a brilliant, brilliant man. And he wrote a paper in 1934. It was published in the MIT Review of Physics or something, pardon me. And then this paper won him the Montefiore Prize at the University of Liège in Belgium in 1935. And what did he say? Well, he said that all of that tensor calculus, hyperdimensional mathematics, in the general theory of relativity can be used to explain electrical transients and other phenomena that electrical engineers always have to account for in large networked electrical systems, especially rotating electrical systems. Now, what did he just say? Well, he really said, number one, every electrical system, think CERN.
Yeah.
Every electrical system, from your toaster to your microwave to your refrigerator to your oven to CERN, every single electrical system is a hyperdimensional object because the mathematics needed to model it exists in more than 3 dimensions. So by dint of that fact, every electrical system, including our brain, every electrical system is transducing something from higher dimensions, from outside this physical world. That's what he just said. Number two, he said that it exists right here on our laboratory bench, and we can manipulate it.
Yeah.
Okay? So if there's a basis for your speculation about CERN in that respect, that's where I'd say it lies. Now, interestingly enough, CERN, just a couple years ago, finally came out and admitted what I and others always thought was really going on with the thing, is number one, they were looking for proof of these extra dimensions, and they've admitted finally that that's one of the things that they're trying to do. They haven't said exactly how they're doing it or trying to do it. That's I find very interesting. And the other thing that they are admitting to is, this was just this year, as a matter of fact, they're looking into scalars. They're looking into scalar physics. So could that be related to consciousness? Yeah, very, possibly. Very, more than just possibly, I'd say very possibly.
Now, with all these things that you just mentioned, you know, with them finding these other dimensions and stuff, now, I'm not saying I'm a believer in the simulation theory, but it makes you wonder, like, how do we come across this? I know that's a crazy theory. I
don't even know what a simulation theory is.
That we live in a simulated
universe. A simulation. Okay, simulation. Okay.
And it makes you wonder, how do we explain these other dimensions? Are the actual physical physical dimensions, or I've heard people say that these other dimensions are just like other, I guess you could say, rooms within the program or whatever, you know. I guess, what do you think about that, Joseph?
Well,
I know it's a far out theory.
No, it isn't. The problem with it is that there are many possible answers to it. But for my intuition about higher dimensions is, you're looking at, imagine if you were to model physical reality as a set, a mathematical set comprising certain elements. Well, you would say it consists of XYZ coordinates, it's got a delta t time function in it, and then there's going to be there's going to be the presence of the Greek letter C. And what that represents mathematically is the phase that something is in. Okay? It's like, think of radio waves.
Yeah.
You can have radio waves that are in phase or out of phase. And if they're perfectly out of phase, they'll cancel each other out. But let's assume this entire universe has a certain phase structure to it. That doesn't prohibit all of the same elements being present in another universe, but in a different phase space. So in other words, I've always thought that ideas of multiverse theory and so on and so forth are intimately related to the phenomenon of harmonics and phase. Okay, so if you're looking for extra dimensions, what you're possibly really looking at is the phenomenon of phase. So I have no difficulty on that basis, assuming that that's true. I have no difficulty assuming then, okay, then everything that we are participating in to some extent is a simulation insofar as everything ultimately, particularly in physics, everything ultimately is about information theory.
Mm-hmm.
So are we living in a program that's working itself out in a certain way? Yeah. But the problem is...
because everything is mathematics in a way.
Everything is mathematics in a way. The problem there is each of us is our own program. You know, we're all making our own decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So the real question then becomes, you know, let's go back to quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics begins really with the uncertainty principle of Heisenberg. And what does that say? Well, it says something very simple, but when you stop and think about how that simple thing that it says, what the implications of it are, then it gets pretty hairy. Because what Heisenberg said is you cannot measure the position and momentum of an electron at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Shiloh, it's okay. It's okay.
I give her some attention.
Yeah, she's an attention hog. What you've said when you say that you cannot measure position and momentum at the same time, is what you've really said is before you take any measurement in any experiment, you are already determining the outcome of the experiment,
mm-hmm.
depending on what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, thus far, quantum mechanics has gotten around the philosophical problem by saying, well, that's only at the micro level. That's only at the quantum mechanical level. But you're now getting to the point in physics where they're wondering whether or not there is an effect, an observer effect, on the macroverse, on the world at large. Well, how would you go about trying to figure out if there was? Well, one way you would do it is you'd start monkeying with group observers and seeing if that created any sort of massive effect in the world at large. And I think they've been doing that, as a matter of fact. That's what I think Mandela effect is.
Well said, Joseph. Well said. You wrote an article titled, Will the Movie Splice Become a Reality in Japan? Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Why are scientists conducting, because I've seen that movie, Splice.
Mm-hmm.
Why are scientists conducting in these Frankensteinian type genetic tampering? Could one possible variable at play be that they are working on creating a more perfect human being?
That's precisely it.
Could possibly be better to withstand the emergence of humans and artificial intelligence? Because I really think one of the agendas of artificial intelligence is to eventually merge,
mm-hmm.
of course, human consciousness into machines.
Mm-hmm.
Could that be why there are those whom are experimenting with these sinister genetic experiments?
Well, yeah, I think that you know, let's go back to what I said earlier about Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. In those two states, you had the creation of nation states that were wholly philosophically dedicated to a technocratic state and to the quote-unquote betterment of mankind via science. Think of the eugenicist movement in this country.
Yeah,
you know, we've got to get rid of all the bad races, whatever
mm-hmm.
that is, you know, and propagate proper genes and proper bloodlines and so on and so forth. And that's the problem. You're dealing with a group of people, number one, that are ideologically committed to the idea that science is the solution to everything. And if it is the solution to everything, there can be no constraints on it. And that scares me because we're not clever enough to figure out the relationship of complex systems. I mean, we've been tinkering with the weather now for decades, and it's going nuts. And the reason why is the
geocausality.
Yeah, it's precisely. So they're dealing with a complex system with the genome, and they're thinking that they're masters of the universe and that they're going to fix everything. I think the only thing they're going to end up doing is making a big mess of everything. So you're dealing with people that have no moral constraints either from religion or from their own, ethical system, because they're dedicated to this proposition that science can make everything, including us, better. Well, the problem here is, how are they defining better? Is that kind of society, is a merger with a machine of humanity, is that better? And if so, why? And they can't explain it, because once you get into the why questions, then you're out of the realm of science and you're into the realm of metaphysics. It's the old problem again.
All right. How far down the rabbit hole have we gone to where it's almost the socially accepted norm for humans to be having sex with robots?
Oh, jeez.
Because I know you've heard about it.
Yes.
You've heard about it. And it's only getting worse.
Yes.
The immorality of the human race, is losing its grasp on the true nature of what it truly means to be a human.
Yes.
And it's only going to get worse as the rise of AI becomes more and more advanced.
Yeah.
Is that another variable of the elite's agenda, to where being human is something of the old world, and for us to accept the mergence with machines?
Yeah, I think so. Look, the choice of the world that we're entering into is, you can either choose to be deliberately human and maintain some humanity, or you can go along with the technocratic agenda. And I don't know about you, I don't want to have sex with a machine.
I don't either. I like being human.
I mean, just, and I don't mean to be crude here, folks, but just from the male point of view, the idea of a machine and that part of my body having any connection with each other, I'm too chicken. I got to be telling you right now, I'm too chicken even to contemplate the idea,
Well, it's just crazy how people, and that's what they were wanting. They want us to become.
Yes.
It's boring to be a human. The old world, the old way of thinking, being human is boring. We need to accept the emergence of technology, machines, and AI, and even become partners with AI.
Look, the most complex music ever composed was Johann Sebastian Bach. Here's a guy that could write multi-track music, 10, 12, 14, up to 26 independently moving lines of music, and have it come out making harmonic sense. It wasn't ugly. It makes sense. Well, that's a human being doing that. People tell me that they've created artificial intelligence music programs that can do the same thing, and I've listened to some of it. And I'm sorry, it's not there. Why? Because, and here is, I think, a key to the difference between the technocrat and a traditionally grounded human being. In other words, someone who is grounded in the traditions that created this civilization. And that is, for the tradition, reason is not reducible to mere logic. Reason incorporates the human passions. It incorporates the human emotions. That's what they meant by reason. It wasn't merely a syllogism. But if you look at the technocrat, if you look at the way these people tend to define reason either by their actions, and most often it's by their actions rather than anything that they've explicitly said. What you see is someone who has reduced reason to mere rationality, to the mere thought, divorced from an awareness of the human passions and human emotions and how those things can be controlled through self-discipline and self-renunciation and so on, and used as part of your thought process. That's what drives that art back in the 18th century. It's that understanding of reason. We've reduced, in other words, we're living in a technocratic culture that effectively has reduced what people think of as reason. It's no longer to include the emotions. And, as far as I'm concerned, that's the key right there that tells you that they are dealing with a vision of humanity that's vastly truncated from what humanity really is.
Now, one thing that really, really gets on my nerves is, I'm sure you've come across this too.
Probably gets on my nerves.
Is that I would say most people already trust computers and machines. Such as, let's say that you have a problem with something and
you go lay down.
And they say, well, sir, the computer says this. No, but I told you this. But the computer says this. They're acting like the computer or machines, they're
infallible.
Wrong. Yes, like they have no. I guess I don't even know how to say it. It's like whatever they say is the truth. You better accept it. It's almost like the way people. I don't know how to say it because it's just so crazy, Joseph. Is that people are already accepting artificial intelligence, machines, computers, as that it is a god.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to
and
this.
It's going to get worse too.
And it's going to get worse. I think it goes back to what we've discussed about the technocratic culture, the technocratic mindset. Most of the research I do in my books is done from other books, and I have to go out and find the books, and that requires research. In other words, I'm an old analog sort of academic in that sense because I follow that tradition. I realize, number one, that most of the information that I want to write about is not on the internet. And number two, the information I have to sift through and exercise human judgment. And here's the problem. Most of these people that accept, the computer said, well, they don't realize that the computer program is written by who? Human beings.
Yep.
And this is the problem with the whole technocratic mindset. I'm a traditionalist to the point that I believe that mankind is fallen, that we are not perfect. We may be perfectible, but I think that's only possible in the tradition I'm coming out of by divine grace. But in any case, whether you accept that or not, we have to get back to the idea that we are flawed creatures. So do you want flawed creatures, narcissists, sociopaths, whatever, and quite frankly, most technocrats that I've ever met have been one of the two. Do you really want these people designing an artificial intelligence program? Well, my answer is no. I certainly don't. No. Stop and think of someone like Mao Zedong or Joseph Stalin, being a computer programmer.
Yeah.
There's the problem right there.
And this kind of goes, of course, you already mentioned this, but we didn't go fully in detail with how the cabal, whatever you want to say, making everything fully automated, or tech companies,
right,
making everything automated. But let's say that's the case, because I meant to ask you this a while ago. Just like your famous statement. We may have to go around Harvey's barn a little bit. But let's say that is the case. That they want to make everything fully automated. then where does that leave us, Joseph? Because we obviously won't have, and we talked about some of this, but we obviously won't have any jobs because artificial intelligence will be doing all the work. But is that part of the agenda? And here's the question we didn't really get into during that. Is that the agenda to make the elite richer and the average Joe where they can barely make ends meet?
Personally, I think if you put yourself into the shoes of what I call the billionaire busybody class, Bill Gates that wants to spray stuff in the atmosphere to dim the sun, for crying out loud. Well,
brilliant.
Yeah, yes, it's just breathtakingly stupid, because all life on this planet, all of our energy, everything, our food supply, everything is dependent on the sun. So the last thing I want to do is
Mitosis.
Yeah, exactly. Everything is dependent on the sun. The last thing I want to do is have some billionaire busybody crawl into bed, a very adulterous bed with Harvard University, tinkering around with how much sunlight falls on the earth, for crying out loud. These people are breathtaking in their hubris. But the real question is, why are they doing it? Well, number one, again, we're going back to the technocratic mentality. They have truncated what they perceive as reason. They have taken all of that stuff that has created our art, our music, our architecture, our literature, and they say that that's not part of the rational faculty of mankind. That's number one. So what they've done in that step alone is they have dehumanized all of humanity. And therefore, us deplorables out here, us plebes, are just so much useless eaters. We're cattle. And I really think it's part of their thinking that we don't need, with all of these wonderful technologies coming down the line, we don't need all of these excess useless eaters. We can get along without them. So yeah, let's, corral them and get them all into the big cities, and then, shut them out of work and replace the hamburger flipper with a robot, and everything will be fine. No, I don't think so. Because again, what happens, and I go back to Asimov, if you're doing that, if you have that kind of society, eventually people become stupid. And we're seeing it happen. You've just already, alluded to it. The computer said.
Yeah.
And the computer must be right. I'm just a lowly...
Or sex robots.
Or sex robots. What happens if the system goes down? Then you might need a couple of those useless eaters that know which way port and starboard is on a ship, or what gauges to open on a steam locomotive, or what have you. At that point, I think they're opening themselves up for their own takedown. And they don't see it. This is what to me is breathtaking. They don't see it. They just don't see themselves as doing that. They think they've got it all figured out. They don't.
And last question for this segment, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll possibly go into the next angle with this will be the transhumanist agenda.
Jeez.
Because it kind of ties in a little bit. So what do we as human species here on Earth need to do with, you already talked about the analog system. That's one thing that we could do to prevent a lot of this. But what do we as human species here on Earth need to do to prevent the Terminator type futuristic society that the elite have in blueprint for us? Do we have hope?
Oh yeah,
you already mentioned the analog, but what else is there? What can we do?
Well, this is going to sound like a kooky answer, but I've been saying it over and over and over. And there are a few people that are getting or understanding what I'm really saying, and that's own the culture. Monetize your whatever your creative gift is, monetize it. If it's gardening, monetize it. If it's painting, monetize it. If it's writing fiction or whatever, monetize it. If it's composing music, monetize it. Because in the inhuman universe these people are creating, any manifestation, and I mean this very sincerely, any manifestation of traditional human culture, particularly high culture, which we totally lack in this country, but
I agree.
But any manifestation of that is going to draw people simply because they're going to see the humanity in it. I would much rather, and to give you a very simple example, I'd much rather go to a coffee house and listen to some local band playing guitars or singing songs or whatever, than sit down in front of a computer and exchange ideas with Bill Gates or Elon Musk or any of these people. Because the future that these people are projecting is anti-human. So in other words, humanize yourself as much as possible. Dig into the foundations of this culture. Understand what created this culture. And then act on it. And act on it locally. Forget about the government. The government is not going to do this. Forget about the big corporations. They're incapable of doing it. They're the ones leading the charge for all of this anti-human stuff. I mean, look at the movies that Hollywood puts out. Look at the movies that they put out and compare them to the movies that they used to put out 60 or 70 years ago. I'd much rather sit and watch Humphrey Bogart in The Maltese Falcon, because you've got characters, you've got people that know the craft of acting, you've got script writers that know how to spice up the dialogue and use double entendre and things like this. I'd much rather watch that kind of movie than go to a modern movie where the entire movie is carried by computer-generated graphics and special effects, and all of this stuff. The difference there is you're looking at film as an art form, and you're looking at film as, what, entertainment and a moneymaker? I don't know. But it's things like that that I think we need to be about. And cut yourself out of the system as much as possible. The other thing is don't surrender your sovereignty over your information. I'm so totally against ebooks for the very simple reason that you thought the Soviet encyclopedia was a joke under Joseph Stalin. Today Yezhov is in the picture with Stalin, and in the next edition he's not because he's been purged. Well, that was all done analog. But now just imagine the power over information if all of our books are turned over to Amazon and they can go in there and modify the text, take out things from the text that they don't like. And it's already happened to Mozart. Mozart's opera, Idiomeo, if you don't know the opera, is about a Moor, a black man, who's the villain in the opera. In the name of political correctness, they've gone in and changed the actual text of the opera. So it's already happening.
Scary, man.
It's very scary. Yeah. When you have that kind of agenda that can go in and tamper and alter the historical memory of this culture, if you can go in and cut people off from that past, what are you really doing? You're cutting them off from that tradition which said what? Which said that reason is more than just the rational syllogistic capability of the human mind. It's part of our human nature to have passions like love, jealousy, virtue, justice, and so on. It's part of our human nature, and that's, in the old definition, those are part and a component of human reason.
And that's everything they're trying to take away.
And that's everything they're trying to take away.